Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Brian Freeman, who is a thriller author. He's written several series, as well as he's writing some Jason Bourne books. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, Brian, could you explain exactly what it is that you write?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the work that comes out under my name, I'd probably call psychological thrillers, and they kind of run the gamut. I've got a long running a police series set up in Duluth, Minnesota, with my hero Jonathan Stride. In fact, the 11th novel in the Stride series comes out on November 1st. And even though some people call them police procedurals, they tend to be very heavy in terms of the psychology of the crimes and the characters, and that's really where I kind of put my focus. And then my most recent thriller, if I cannot drop it, is a standalone thriller called I Remember You, and I Remember You. Really intense psychological thriller. The reviews have called it sort of Michael Crichton-esque, which I like. So I like to kind of give readers a sense that they never really know what I'm going to do next. I always tell them that I don't like to nail down my brand to one type of book because I really enjoy the diversity of stories that I tell and the characters that I can create. I kind of like to think of it more as if you think about Tom Hanks as an actor, you never know what he's going to do in a movie next because all his roles are so diverse. But if he's in it, it's going to be a great story. You're going to enjoy the movie. Well, that's kind of what I want readers to feel about my books. They may not know what I'm going to do next, but I hope that when they open it up, they know they're going to get some great storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so what can readers expect from I Remember?
I Remember You is the story of a young woman named Hallie Evers. It's actually told in a female first-person voice. And Hallie dies at the beginning of the book. Her heart stops, and yet then she's revived in the hospital. And when she wakes up, she's fine, except she seems to have memories in her head that don't seem to line up with her own life, and she remembers people that she has no other recollection of knowing, and she has visions of a city where she knows the city so well that she can tell you what's around the next corner, and yet she knows she's never been to that city in her life. So that's kind of the setup for I Remember You, is what's really going on in Hallie's mind. And it's been a busy summer because simultaneously, within a couple of weeks of I Remember You coming out, the third novel in my Robert Ludlum Jason Bourne series came out, The Bourne Sacrifice, and so that's been out at the same time, and I've been thrilled with the responses from readers to my take on Jason Bourne. I love being able to do again something really different. I mean, my books I tend to be very intense and psychological. The Ludlum Bourne books very action oriented, very adrenaline oriented. So for me, that's the fun. I can put down one book and pick up something completely different the next day.
Mm-hmm. Now, what was your inspiration for I Remember You?
Yeah, I actually love working with memory as a theme. I've done that in a few different books. The first time I did that really was in my book, The Nightbird, about 5 years ago, which was dealing with the idea of can people's memories from the past be erased, which is something that psychologists have dealt with in trauma victims. I Remember You takes kind of a different tack. It deals with the idea of can memories be stored and backed up. And I always thought it was sort of interesting, this idea that one of the ways that you could potentially treat Alzheimer's victims or stroke victims was having sort of their memories backed up, and can they be restored in someone's mind. And it's a fascinating, sort of pioneering medical idea, but of course for a thriller writer you start to think about, well, what
Yeah.
could go wrong with that?
Yeah, and it's also something that could be, well, could it be somebody's past life or whatever? That's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's all sorts of fertile thriller ground to furrow there. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how much research did you have to do for this book?
Yeah, I was digging into a lot of what's actually going on in memory research and how far scientists have gotten in this regard. And that's the thing about writing a thriller is you're always taking this to a dramatic extreme, and yet the underlying idea of what they're trying to do is actually is pretty close. There's a reference in the book to the fact that a couple of years ago, some Russian scientists had a lot of success in being able to recreate what people were thinking by what they were seeing on the screen. So they would show them photographs of people and objects, and then they would try to interpret the brainwaves in order to recreate what they were actually seeing. And it's remarkable stuff, and a little scary too.
Wow. So was it hard to get any information on the Russian studies or?
No, it was actually all right out there on the web. So, and they have photographs of what the images were that people were seeing, and then what the recreations looked like. Yeah, it's a fascinating frontier, and I agreed with the reviewer that talked about it. This kind of feels like a Crichton-esque thriller, because I think that's the sort of theme that Crichton did so well.
Hmm. So what was your favorite research story? And not necessarily for this book, but your favorite overall research story?
That's a good question, and it's kind of a tough call. Honestly, I think what I enjoy about the research side of things is when it gives me the opportunity to chat with folks who have expertise in their particular areas. So, for example, when I was working on my Jonathan Stride novel, Goodbye to the Dead, that book includes sort of an important courtroom scene, and one of my Stride fans actually is a Minnesota county attorney, and so I talked to him about that sequence in the book, and he was very gracious about giving me transcripts of felony trials that he'd worked on, and he read the courtroom scenes to be able to kind of give me advice on the legal minutia, and so that's the sort of research experience that I really like, when I have the opportunity to kind of talk personally with someone who's an expert in a field, and then be able to use their knowledge to make sure I'm not leading people astray.
Okay, great. Excuse me. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out I Remember You?
Well, when you're talking about kind of an out there thriller like this, I mean, I would not call I Remember You sci-fi, but it kind of grazes on the edge of that at times.
Yes.
They've sort of classified it more as a medical thriller, and yet it's not really that either. I mean, it really is dealing so much with what's going on inside the Hallie's head, and the sort of underlying violence that she's remembering, and yet at the same time, I've got this overlay of sort of research and technology that goes along with it. And I think the challenge of a story like that is you're kind of treading that fine line with the reader, that you want them to feel that this is authentic and feel like this is something that could be really happening. And at the same time, you don't want to sort of overload them with research that slows down the story and the character. So you're treading that fine line of providing enough details so that readers can kind of come along for the ride with you, but at the same time not larding down the pace with a lot of scientific detail.
And what about your Jason Bourne book? What was the biggest challenge? And I think I can tell one of your challenges there.
Yeah, well, this is my third Bourne novel. I'm charging along on the fourth right now, and this has been such an amazing opportunity. I mean, it's one of the premier opportunities in the thriller field to be able to take over such an iconic hero like Jason Bourne and bring new life to that series. But that's at the same time also, I think, the biggest challenge. I mean, on one hand, my first reaction when they wanted me to take over the series was, oh my God, and my next reaction was kind of like, oh my God, because it's intimidating to think about stepping into the shoes of a giant of the thriller genre like Robert Ludlum. I was a huge Ludlum fan as a teenager growing up, and so and also then to kind of step into the shoes of such an enduring iconic hero like Bourne. Bourne's been around for more than 40 years at this point. And so many people had different ideas of who Bourne is, either from the Ludlum novels or from the Matt Damon movies or from the von Luesbader novels that Eric did, several in the 2000s. And so what I really had to do was sort of put all that aside and just focus on what an amazing opportunity this was. In fact, the very first two words that I wrote on my whiteboard when I was starting the Bourne Evolution, which was my first Bourne novel, were "have fun," because you just can't lose sight of what a great, a great, enjoyable challenge this is. And it really, writing the Bourne novels has been some of the most fun I've had as a writer. It's just been it's been a great time. So, and part of it too is you have to give yourself permission to make the character your own. I think that when my first book, The Bourne Evolution, was sort of an homage to Ludlum and the Bourne identity, and with my second, The Bourne Treachery, the character needed to start changing based on the things that I was bringing into his life. And so I kind of needed to give myself permission to really take over the series and make Bourne's character mine, and really sort of share ownership of this character with Ludlum. And once I sort of understood that, then the rest of the novel flowed more smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in the Bourne Sacrifice, did you also have a question about whether you would get the character right, as compared to other writers?
I don't think that was as much of a concern. I mean, when I took over with the Bourne Evolution, my goal really was to go back to Ludlum's original vision of Jason Bourne in the Bourne identity, and I didn't want to try to build off the other visions of Bourne. I didn't want to continue what Eric had been doing. I didn't want to sort of build off the Matt Damon movies. I really wanted to go back to what Ludlum had created in this character in the Bourne identity, and make that version, my version of Bourne, really true to that novel, but lift that character up and drop him down into a modern setting with all new plots and all new characters around him, so that a Ludlum reader would recognize, yeah, this is the Jason Bourne I remember from the Bourne identity, and yet he's now sort of in a new world with a new life, and it's kind of like rebooting the series from the ground up. I mean, you don't have to have read anything else to dive into my Bourne novels, because everything is new and fresh and modern with my take on the series. But you still need to be able to, I think, make sure that the original Ludlum fans and the Ludlum aficionados recognize that you're being very true and authentic to Ludlum's vision for that character.
Oh, great. Okay. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Yeah, you would think that this is actually the third novel I've released this year. I had another standalone thriller, The Ursulina, which came out in February. It's one of my all-time favorite books. The Ursulina and The Deep, Deep Snow go together. The Deep, Deep Snow was an Edgar Award finalist last year, and both of them very emotional mysteries. And I love those two books. The Deep, Deep Snow and The Ursulina kind of go hand in hand together. So The Ursulina came out earlier this year. Then this summer, The Bourne Sacrifice and I Remember You. And you'd think 3 would be enough for the year, but no. The 11th novel in my Stride series, The Zero Night, will actually be out on November 1st. And it's been a couple of years since I had a Stride novel out, so readers have been kind of chomping at the bit to see what's up with Stride. So The Zero Night coming out soon, November 1st. It'll be in stores.
Wonderful. Great. Now I have some questions for you about being a writer. What is your favorite part about being a writer and the whole writing and publishing process?
Yeah, oh, that's really good. Well, I mean, honestly, other than that sensation you get when that first box of books arrives and you get the chance to open it up and hold your book in your hands for the first time. I mean, that I've written 25 thrillers at this point in the last 18 years, and that thrill never goes away. It's always just a great experience. Of course, it was funny because all the way back in 2005, when my first novel, Immoral, originally came out, we'd sold Immoral in a bunch of different languages, which was an extraordinary way to get started in this business. And the very first time, after years and years of knocking on the door, that I got to hold my own book in my hands for the first time, turned out to be in a language I couldn't read. The Dutch beat everybody else into print, so I now tell people they can read Immoral in the original Dutch. So, but I think for me, what really is the most satisfying part of of this job is what I hear from readers. I mean, the emails I get from readers, the posts that I see from them on Facebook and Twitter when a new book comes out. It's a reminder of the power that stories have to lift people out of their day-to-day existence and take them somewhere completely different, and how important that experience is in people's lives. And frankly, how increasingly important it's been in the last couple of years because of COVID. I mean, I think so many people have rediscovered the joys of reading, and the way it can take you to someplace completely different. So that's really what I love is, I mean, I love getting those notes from readers, and hearing the role that my books have played in their lives. There's just no substitute for that.
You just brought up an interesting question when you said about the different languages. Did you know of any translation differences? I'm just curious about that.
Well, the contracts always say, they're supposed to translate the books word for word, and yet at the same time, you also know that the nature of language is such that you can't really do that and convey the correct meaning. So that's really the art of the translator. I will say that I was a little suspicious when I got the German edition of Immoral, and it was about, that thick, which, okay, you'd expect that from German. And then I got the Taiwanese edition of Immoral, and it was like that thick. And I was thinking,
Whoa,
a little suspicious here. And then I got a copy, I think about 2 years later, of the Russian edition of Immoral, and the primary cover image on the Russian edition of Immoral was this big helicopter. And I said to my wife, I know it's been a while since I've read Immoral, but I don't honestly remember there being a helicopter in the book. And in fact, there is not. So I don't know. I think that in translation in Russian, Immoral may have become a story about the Russian mafia or something. So
that's interesting. I'm always concerned, wondering about that.
Yeah, and with the Romance languages, I can usually kind of tell because the names are still in there, and I can at least get a sense. And I know enough French and German that I can sort of make sure that they're following along pretty closely with what I wrote. With the Asian and Cyrillic languages, I don't have a clue. So I'm just relying on the fact that they're following along. And the Deep Snow ended up being a #1 bestseller in Taiwan, of all places.
Wow.
So I don't know what they're doing there in translation, but whatever it is, it seems to work. So I'm happy with that.
Great. Okay. What do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that?
You would think that after 25 books that the process would get easier. And you know what? It never does. It is every bit as intense and challenging in your 26th book as it is in your first book. And I think that's just the nature of the writer's character. I mean, I think you're always kind of your own worst enemy, and you're struggling with those voices inside that say, oh, well, you can't do this again, and this is never going to work. And you just have to stare down those voices, and in fact use those voices to make the books even better. I mean, I think it's that sort of neurotic part of the writer's character that actually feeds into the quality of what comes out on the page, because I don't think you're ever satisfied with what you're writing. You're always looking to make it better, to make it smoother, to make the stories more compelling and dramatic, to make the characters more interesting. And so it's those voices that actually you sort of feed off that negative energy to try to make the books even stronger.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
My favorite adventure during my writing career. Well, writers, I don't know. I mean, other than Clive Cussler, who was every bit as adventurous as Dirk Pitt, his hero. I think most writers tend to be not particularly adventurous types. I think it was Danielle Steele had written a book about mountain climbing at one point. I mean, she's written a book about everything, I would imagine.
I think so.
And somebody asked her, have you ever been, mountain climbing? She said, "Oh my God, no. Why would I want to do something like that? I want to sit in my office and write about that." So I try to limit my adventures, but at the same time, there are things that come up they're always fun and different and new experiences that you wouldn't get any other way. I mean, doing police ride-alongs and kind of getting into the inner workings of how police departments actually work. And I remember when shortly after Immoral came out, the folks at Bookspan, which owned the Literary Guild and the Book of the Month Club, and invited me and Marcia to this publishing party in New York that they do every year, and so we ended up having dinner with I think it was Robin Cook and several other big time authors that I'd always loved, and so it was just amazing being part of that crowd. And then I can remember one time I'd been over at the London Book Fair, and I was invited to a book club gathering over in Utrecht. In the Netherlands,
Yeah.
and so I met this book club over there, and they'd been enjoying my books in Dutch, and so I sort of joined their book club party, and boy, nobody parties like the Dutch. That event started at noon, and it didn't break up until 10 o'clock at night. So that was a 10-hour event. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, you'd think you'd run out of things to say. We were going back and forth, and all these readers had great questions, and we were chatting about everything. So it's those kinds of things you look back on, and they're things that were made possible by your book career that otherwise you'd never have those kinds of experiences in your life.
Okay. And what is the greatest lesson that you've learned during your writing career?
Well, when aspiring writers, ask me for advice, I usually tell them that you always have to remember that 100% of unwritten books have never been published. So somewhere along the line, there has to be a union of your backside and a chair and some super glue, so that you sit there and keep typing. Because I think that because writers tend to be their own worst enemy, it's particularly difficult for aspiring writers that they tend to psych themselves out, and they get 50 pages into a book and this is no good, and they kind of give up on themselves. I wrote 5 books in my life that are still sitting in my nightstand drawer before I ever even started in on the book that became Immoral, which was my breakthrough book. So you really can never give up on yourself. I mean, you have to have kind of a crazy level of self-determination in this business, and that's what carries you through.
Okay. And is that the one piece of advice that you would give to other writers? Or
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, it's because we tend to be our own worst enemies. You have to shout down that voice in your head that tells you you can't do it, and in fact turn it around and use that sort of neurotic anxiety to become an even better writer.
Mhm. Are there any clubs, groups, or organizations that you would recommend to other writers that may have helped you along your way?
I was never that kind of guy. There are a lot of writers that really thrive on, writers groups and things of that nature. That just wasn't my scene. I
Yeah.
kind of preferred to take the solitary road, but there are plenty of writers that use those very successfully. So I would say, you have to know yourself. I mean, if something like that, if that kind of feedback is useful, then do it. And if it's not, don't feel like that's a necessary part of the process, because there are plenty of writers, me included, that did not go that way.
Okay. Now I have questions about about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't know or don't realize about you?
um, well, let's see. I think the one thing that people probably are surprised at from a thriller writer is that Marcia and I have probably been to Disney World 40 times in our life. So, there are times when when you spend your life dealing with darkness and drama and murder and suspense, that a little whimsy and a little small world after all is kind of good. So.
Yeah, it is. I think you need a little break from the murder and the
Exactly.
mayhem.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
What question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
Yeah, I've done so many hundreds of interviews over the years. I'm not sure there's any questions that haven't been asked along the way. It's pretty rare for somebody to come up with something new. Although that one's pretty new. What I'll tell you is my favorite question that
Okay.
I only got once, and I thought it was one of the best questions that I've ever received. And it was actually from a reader at an event who asked me if you met Jonathan Stride, my Duluth hero, on the street, would you
Hmm.
recognize him? And I said, "Oh, that's really good." And I said, I don't think I would, but I bet you would, because I very deliberately paint my characters in watercolors. I want to provide you with enough detail to seed and feed your imagination, but then I want you to fill in the gaps and build out that character inside your own head. So I think my readers have a very vivid image of who Stride and my other heroes are and what they look like. But I think what you'd hear from them is very, very different. So if I ask readers, well, who do you think should play Stride in the movies? They tend to come up with very clear ideas of different actors, but they're all very, very different interpretations because I think their vision of Stride is different. And I also think that gives readers sort of shared ownership in the character because it's their mind that helps to bring that character to life. And I think as a result, they feel this strong emotional attachment to the character.
Wow, that is a great question. I like that one. Okay. Yeah, I think that's so true because everybody has a different view of how a person would look, maybe.
Right, right, right. Yeah. And I don't think readers are aware of it. I mean, I'm giving them certain little details, but I'm not trying to dictate to them, all right, this is exactly what that character needs to look like because I want the reader to be able to sort of paint that character themselves. And there are some writers that want to control the exact image that the reader's going to have in their heads, which is perfectly fine. But for me, I'm always sensitive as a thriller writer to pace. And the more detail that I'm putting in, the more I'm slowing the reader down. And so I want to give you just enough detail to kind of, feed that imagination and get you filling in the gaps for me. And that's not only going to bring you closer to the story and the character, but I think it's also going to make the narrative move faster.
Hmm. Great. So what is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for your non-writing the hobbies and things that
I'll
you
I'll let you know when that happens. Yeah, um, yeah. I've written 3 books a year for the last 3 years or so, which is
Oh,
just an unbelievable pace. I sometimes I kind of look at it and just shake my head myself. I'm not quite sure how I've done that. This year I'm only on track to do 2 books, so I feel like I'm kind of slacking a little bit. So it doesn't leave me a lot of extra time. But one thing I actually really enjoy is cooking and baking. Mostly because you have to focus on what you're doing to get it right. If you get the ingredients wrong, if you miss something, if you get the measurements wrong, you're going to screw up the dish. And so it forces me to kind of push aside, whatever book I may be working on and be in the moment of what I'm doing in the kitchen. So I kind of like that because it's a way to sort of take me out of the writing world for at least a little while. And I mean, I love writing. I love the books that I create, but it's such an all-consuming thing that you're always looking for ways that ways that you can kind of push it aside a little bit and kind of look at other parts of life too.
Interesting. Because I would think that other times the characters may still be in your head. Yeah.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yep, yep. But
Yeah.
fortunately, Stride's usually not there saying that's a little too much oregano. So
Okay. And okay. So what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
my writing space, which I'm in now, I will not turn the camera around. I don't want to scare your readers. It tends to be a little messy. I tend to have whenever book I'm working on, I tend to have a lot of notes and notepads and things all filled up with different thoughts about each character in each chapter, and so that kind of gets spread out across the desk. And I actually like to work outside quite a lot. So a lot of times, when I'm at the point where I'm actually getting words on the page, I'll take my laptop out to the deck and just sit there and work outside on the deck because I don't know, there's something about the fresh air that I just find sort of energizing.
Okay. And do you need to have some food, specific foods or drinks with you when you're writing?
Got to have coffee to keep me going.
Gotta have the coffee. Gotta have the coffee to keep you awake.
Exactly. Yeah, Marcia and I will be the first ones to say we are not exactly morning people. We're so if you're expecting, a great insights for us first thing in the morning, that's unlikely, at least until we've had a couple cups of coffee.
Yeah, yep. Okay. And when you're writing, do you prefer music or silence or what? When if it's music, do you need lyrics or just instrumentals?
Yeah, again, it varies. I don't like to actually stick to one process because I like to kind of keep myself on edge and do things a little differently. Most of the time, I'd say I like it silent. And in fact, I have my, let's see here, my Bose earbuds that I use that are really good at kind of shutting out the world. So that way, if I'm really in the mood for silence and I need to be kind of intricate with a particular scene, I can really sort of shut out everything else that's going on in the house by putting my earbuds in. But sometimes I like a little white noise in the background. I might actually plug in an ocean CD or a thunderstorm recording or something like that that just sort of acts as white noise in the background. And sometimes if I'm writing a scene where there's music going on in the chapter, I'll actually play that music and listen to it while I'm writing it, so it kind of puts me in the mood of the characters. So in the next Jason Bourne novel, the one that I'm working on right now, at one point he's down in the Bahamas and he's in a club where they have some soca music playing, and so I was writing those couple of chapters with this very energetic soca beat going on in my head, and so that I think just helps put you in the mood for what the character's experiencing.
You're actually the first author that I've spoken with that has used things like ocean,
Interesting.
music and things like that, or at least have told me that. Yeah, but that's really interesting. I love that. I think that's amazing. Um, okay, and writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions that either help or hinder them with their work. And do you have any? And do they help or hinder you?
Yeah, Marcia and I have three cats, and so they are often visitors into my office. And in fact, our orange cat Heathrow seems to have the idea that he has first claim on my office chair. And so when I get to the office in the morning, we often have to negotiate who's actually going to have a chance to sit down. You'll note that I am standing up at this point, which typically means that my chair is taken. So so yes, the cats are always there to help.
Okay. And I have two more questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And in every video, I plug Annie's. And you can get Brian's books at Annie's Bookstop of Worcester if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can order Brian's books if you send us email at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your books?
Yeah, well, that's a great solution to call an indie bookseller, because it doesn't matter where they're located. Virtually all of them will happily ship you copies, and so there are some great indie bookstores in Minnesota where I am that do exactly the same thing. So Once Upon a Crime in Minneapolis is a terrific mystery bookstore. The bookstore at Fitger's up in Duluth is kind of Stride's unofficial home as a bookstore. So that's a great place to go. And if you go out to my website, there's summaries and information about all of my books out on my website, and then links where you can get it. You can go to bookshop.org, or if you prefer audiobooks, you can go to someplace like Audible. So it all kind of depends on what format people like to read in, and that's fine. But my website is bfreemanbooks.com. That's all one word, bfreemanbooks.com. And again, that's got links to all of my books out there, as well as a way to reach out to me. You can get on my mailing list for my newsletter, and you can send me emails directly from the site as well.
Great. Okay. And my last question is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Yeah, the in addition to my website, bfreemanbooks.com, you can also find me on most of the social media platforms. So I'm out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So if you go to B Freeman Books on Twitter or Instagram, you're going to catch up with me there. And on Facebook, my Facebook page is actually facebook.com/bfreemanfans. So anywhere you're out on social media, you can find me there. I haven't done any TikTok dances yet, but who knows what the future holds. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for speaking with me today. And hopefully, if you ever get to the Boston or Worcester area, you'll come and visit us.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, and good luck with your 3 books this year.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.